that exemplify that, some that will hit really close to home, and I think some that may be a little bit illuminating. I'll start with my story, right? So I, of course, am a HBCU alum. I'm a Howard man, a proud Howard man. 2 degrees from Howard, and then I have my master's from NYU, which was a really formidable experience in my life as well. I graduated Howard undergrad in 2008, which is only important not to date myself, but to really set the scene that in 2008, the financial crisis was hitting. And so there was a major flood of folks trying to figure out how to get the jobs that we thought we could get yesterday that were no longer in existence or were no longer hiring people. And there was also a major rush toward graduate school. So I went to teach in Senegal my first year out of Howard. Formidable experience. I come from Carson, California, originally in the LA County area. Got a chance to go to Howard, didn't travel at all before going to Howard, and got a chance to travel a lot at Howard. So I was able to travel to, I think, 12 countries, and I lived in 3 countries all throughout the African diaspora. So I got bit by this travel bug. And so I graduated and I wanted to continue to travel a bit. So I went to teach in Senegal, West Africa, which gave me a year buffer. But when I came back, it was still the middle of the financial crisis. And so I came to Wagner in the fall of, well, really the summer of 2009. And it's important because that was the largest class in Wagner history at that time. And so I remember, I don't know if they still do this, but we got there, got to Wagner, got to New York, and there was a in-person orientation. So we went to some place, some type of retreat place. And again, I'm from Howard. And so I'm from LA, I'm from Howard. I'd just been all over Africa. And it was a little bit of a peculiar scene when I got to NYU Wagner to the School of Public Service. And I did not see a lot of people that look like me. And so for any of those that know me, a few people on this call know me, I'm a pretty direct guy. And so I went to that orientation and I was just kind of looking around. I wasn't able to really fully engage. And when I came back, I remember the first day back, or maybe the first, I think we left and went away and came back. But I remember I asked for a meeting with the dean. At that time, it was Dean Ellen Shaw, great dean who I built a relationship with. And I was just really direct with her. I said, "You lied to me," right? And I was somewhat recruited to come to Wagner, got a scholarship. And I said, "You lied to me." I said, "You told me that I could receive a phenomenal education at this institution, and you and I both know that that's not possible. You have a top school of public service, and the reality is that the demographic here doesn't represent the demographic that we're going to serve. And so I don't agree with you that I can receive a phenomenal education, and I really feel misled in even choosing this place." And so Dean Shaw was very direct with me. She was immediate in her response, and she said, "You're right." She said, "We know that, and we are trying our best to work on it." And my response, again, for those that know me, was, "Well, you need to try harder." But here's the other side of that power, right? You can't just call truth to power. You've also got to make yourself vulnerable in the equation as well. And so what I said was, and she accepted and really encouraged me to do it. She said, "Well, join in with us because we really are having trouble. What you say is right, but we need help." And so what I did, I started working with the admissions team. I became the president of the Black Student Association, started working within the institution. But of course, we needed more people to come into the institution. And so I say this, and some folks will really know this. I literally just started walking people into Wagner. That was my first thing was, you need more people. I'm going to bring you more people. And when I bring them, I don't really want to hear a lot when I bring them, right? Like, you need more people. Let's make this happen. So that was step one. Unfortunately, that's 4 people, right? So I'm not making a big splash at that point. Um, but also, one of the things I did, and I encourage you guys to do this if you haven't done it already, but I also got involved with main campus. So at that time, there was the Center for Multicultural Education and Programming on main campus, CMEP. I got involved with the center director at that time, and then I met a man, and hopefully you guys know Alan, or you're going to go meet Alan after this, but Alan McFarland, who at that time, I looked it up, he was the vice president for like diversity or something like that. But I met Alan. Alan is actually an NYU alum, probably now in his 60s. And I went to Alan and said the same thing, man, like, this is ridiculous. And Alan was very direct and very clear, just like Dean Shaw. He said, "Listen, man, the reality is that we need help from people like you to help transform this place." At that time, I'm ashamed to say, as large as NYU is, the Black Student Union at the undergraduate level was not active at all. And so I worked with Alan and I worked with the head of CMEP. I worked with some really super ambitious undergrad students. We reinvigorated the BSU, had a joint conference between the BSU and Wagner, had this big Wagner conference, and really did our best to illuminate the Black population on both campuses, and really did our best to kind of build that bridge between undergrad and grad in that space. One of the reasons I thought that was important, I don't know if you guys spend a lot of time at BOPES, but NYU can be a lonely place, right? And coming from Howard, I'm at Howard now, I'm assistant provost, so if I look out my window, we have the yard, right? And the yard in the springtime is cold today, but the yard in the springtime is ours. It's our home. Anybody that's from HBC, you see all of your people there. The fraternities are stepping, the sororities are stepping, everybody else. It's just excellence. Well, if you walk out of Boats, you're at Washington Square Park, right? And so for so many people, you can be lonely, so lonely in this place where you're surrounded by others. And I always think that's exemplified by those tall plexiglass structures at Boats at that time. And again, I would have to be sensitive, but NYU was one of the suicide capitals in the college world at that time, right? And it exemplified that loneliness that you could have as a normal student. And so to imagine being a Black person, a Black male, particularly, it can really be a lonely place. And so that was really important to me, to not only call truth to power, but to then be a part of the equation to figure, okay, well, what does this look like? And I'm still doing that work now. A part of my role at Howard is student engagement and really working on, I'm sad to say at Howard, we have 25% men, 19% Black men. And that really is exemplified throughout the HBC and really the college environment. While Black women are ripping it up, to be clear, shout out to the Black women. Black men are really struggling in a lot of ways. And so I've continued to engage in that space to try to be a part of the solution. That's a part of what I want to talk to you guys about today is power, right? And what does that power mean? And what does it mean to call truth to power? And what role do we play today, tomorrow, and beyond? That was a lighthearted one. Now I'm gonna get a little bit heavier, right? The other day we celebrated President's Day. And I think about July 4th, 1776 frequently, right? It was a unique day. Thomas Jefferson, who's not one of the presidents that we celebrated for President's Day, although we could tell some stories about those two guys as well. But Thomas Jefferson, the third president, who wrote the preamble, really important document, preamble to the Declaration of Independence, famously wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." That's a heavy document, especially if you're a historian. I'm a social historian. If you understand the context of that document, leaving Great Britain and then writing this document in this context that hadn't really been written before, it's an important idea that he's writing down, but it's just an idea. Because remember, when Thomas Jefferson wrote that document, literally as the ink was drying, he owned over 200 human beings. So America has always been this space in between the aspirational ideas in those documents from those founding fathers, most of them which own enslaved human beings, which were our ancestors or many of our ancestors, and this aspirational idea, right? I'm sorry, it's a space between the aspirational idea of the words written in that document and the reality of the nastiness that actually existed, right? As Thomas Jefferson left there, he went and raped Sally Hemings several times and had progeny that's still alive today. And of course, it couldn't be some consensual because she was his property. Some really heavy, heavy, nasty, nasty stuff that we don't really acknowledge when we celebrate President's Day. When we pull out our wallet and we pay for Starbucks, when you guys go to lunch today, it's some heavy stuff in the things that we accept naturally and normally as a part of our American citizenship. I think it's important to think about the space in between who America has always projected herself to be and who she's always been, right? So if you think about this moment, many of us are really dismayed by what we see every day on the news. Every day it's a different article. It's a blitzkrieg, right? A blitzkrieg. The idea right now is everything all at once. And so every day you literally wake up and you're hit in the mouth with something else. Something else is being taken. Something else is being moved away from you. And my appeal to you guys as leaders, as the chosen leaders, as people that decided to dedicate your life to public service, is to do and exemplify something that one of my mentors told me that I never forgot about. He said, for us, equanimity under duress is required. So I ask for you to have that same equanimity, because here's the reality. We all were alive during the Obama administration. I got a picture with Obama, President Obama, right above my desk. Came to Howard. You know, it was a phenomenal experience. I was a senior advisor to the president at that time. I enjoyed waking up every day and seeing that beautiful Black family on TV. I also realized as a social historian that our community was not transformed under the Obama administration. The same statistics that we have today were in existence during the Obama administration. And so what we must do is we must focus on that equanimity and consistently understand power and our place in it. See, for us, we have a responsibility and really a privilege that most of the world doesn't have. For the marginalized and oppressed populations in this country, we have always been the people that have pushed America closer and closer and closer to being an aspirational place in those documents. Langston Hughes said it best: America has never been America to me. And I think we get confused when and again, I was on the yard with VP Harris. I know her, was happy. She announced her run for presidency here. The first time she ran, she announced it here on campus. I was there. Know her well. I was at the yard. We had the yard turned up. We was doing the electric slide. Everybody was having a good time. But I think we get caught up in those moments and thinking that America is the place in those documents, when the reality is that no matter how things turned out on November 5th, America was still going to be somewhere in between the place in those documents and the place that we exist in every day. And so for us as the leaders of tomorrow, it's extremely important not to be swayed. There's a social justice pendulum, and I wrote my dissertation on it. I do a lot of research on it. The social justice pendulum is swinging back. Right now, we're in the downswing from the Obama era, right? You can imagine if you're a white supremacist or a white nationalist, a child of white nationalism, it was pretty tough waking up every day seeing Sasha, Malia, Michelle, and Barack on that TV. That inherently complicates your understanding of your existence, your place in society, and everything that you've been taught that is yours as a birthright. That's a complex space. And so Donald Trump on the back end of that was able to help swing that pendulum in the other direction. And we're still living in the downswing of that pendulum. And I know it doesn't feel good. My appeal to you again is equanimity, because America is still America. And although that pendulum is going to swing back and we're going to feel better tomorrow, probably in a couple of years, I don't know. It might be sometimes dictators have a 15-year arc. So we're going to be somewhere between 1 and 15 years for this next period that we have to deal with. But even when it's on the upswing and people are back in favor, back talking about DEI, you back shopping at Target and watching the NFL, the reality is I require, and what you require, what we require is equanimity and a focus on power, right? A focus on power and your role in helping us acquire that power. So that's one thing that I provide to you guys today, is that when the next headline comes in, equanimity under duress is required from our leaders, because the same focus, you're required to have the same focus that you had in October as you do in February. And the reality is you're required to have the same focus that you had between 2009 and 2016 that you are today, because our task hasn't changed very much. We got to get out there and get after it. The next thing I'll talk about, this one is a little bit more lighthearted, is Jay-Z, Kendrick Lamar, and the Super Bowl halftime show. Now, I'm not going to dive into the artistry of it. It's a ton of think pieces out there. I'm mad at The Atlantic that they had a white person right there think piece, but there's a lot of think pieces out there that you can go out and figure out what was the different artistry, what was the different message. What I'd rather talk to you about is power, however. That's the theme of all of this, is power. So first of all, I do want to give a shout out. I'm from Carson, right next to Compton. I grew up with Kendrick's wife, Whitney. We grew up together. Absol, who was his label mate, was one of my good friends growing up. I went to prom with his sister. So I'm connected to all that intimately. TDE Studios is in Carson, DJ Mustard's from Carson. All of those things are connected to me intimately. But I want to give a shout out to Kendrick and say, thank you, Kendrick, for the Blackest experience that the non-Black NFL has ever seen, right? Anybody that knows NFL knows it's one of the most non-Black, damn near anti-Black establishments that we have in this country. And that was exemplified when Colin Kaepernick was unceremoniously kicked out at the height of his game for kneeling for that flag. The NFL let us know very clearly who they were back then, and they've not let their foot off of our necks. But just like we going back to Target next week, We kept watching that football game, right? And we're going to keep watching it tomorrow. And that's the complexity that we have to understand as leaders. So thank you, Kendrick, for that black display of those locks and those grills and those wigs and those braids. Samuel L. Jackson asking him, are you ready to play the game? For him to end with the final declaration, 40 acres and a mule, this is bigger than music. I can have a whole speech with you about the symbolism involved in that. But what I will say is shout out to him for that globally televised protest. It was the largest halftime or the most viewed halftime show in history. And for me, it was a televised protest, right? A la Fela Kuti, Bob Marley, Dead Prez. It was the next generation of that. And I'm so proud that we had that in this moment. I also want to take a step back and say it was power that got us to that moment, because a lot of us, Black folks, wanted Lil Wayne to be there. We started hearing about it a long time ago. How could Weezy F not have this platform in his city? He's got all the background for it. He's got the catalog for it. He's a great entertainer. But you got to understand what happened in 2019. In 2019, Jay-Z and Roc Nation, Jay-Z, who's been doing work in the community silently for a long time, signed a deal with Roger Goodell, the head of the NFL at that time. And I was upset when he did it, because this was right after Colin Kaepernick. But Jay-Z signed a deal to take over all the halftime shows. I think he got a small contract, and then that contract was renewed. And I think that moment was important because it helped us get a seat at the table. Now, for me, it was a seat that I didn't desire. I thought we should leave the whole table, thought we shouldn't be a part of it. But just like y'all going back to Target tomorrow, y'all kept watching that game, and Jay-Z knew that. And I'm y'all, right? I was just at Target recently, and I was watching that game just like y'all. We're not easy to understand our power, right? So what Jay-Z said is, I'll get a seat at that table. Jay-Z also co-produced, and we don't know this, Kendrick Lamar's halftime show. Jay-Z also single-handedly said that Lil Wayne will not have this space because he's not the man that the moment demands. Kendrick is. Kendrick is our young revolutionary that's going to help this world write all those think pieces that you saw the next day, whether you liked it or you didn't. The beautiful thing about power is that you had to receive it. The entire world received it, including the president of the United States. And so that was power. But the piece that I want to also extrapolate is that Jay-Z first had to have the desire to get us a seat at that table. Power sometimes is making a move today that you reap the benefits for tomorrow. People often say life is like a game of chess, right? I always think that's simplistic. Like, you can't just get a king and then win. That's not exactly how it works. I think about life more like the game of Go. I don't know if you guys are familiar. Japan's national board game, the game of Go. It's this game that can go on for weeks, right? You got a set of stones over here. You're playing with somebody on the other side. They have a set of stones. But in the game of Go, you can literally place a stone on the board that you won't touch for hundreds of moves. And so for me, Jay-Z's foresight, and to be clear, it was pretty black. These last ones were pretty black too, with Beyonce and Rihanna and the West Coast brothers from the last years. Those were pseudo black, right? It wasn't as black as this last one, and it wasn't as timely as this last one. But Jay-Z had to get that seat for us to get there, even sometime when that seat seems undesirable. And so I shout out Jay-Z for that. And I say, Jay-Z got us a seat at the table, and Kendrick stood on top of that table with his fist in the air. And then I think the next and the last part that I'll talk to you guys about in terms of power is the power to exist unapologetically, right? You guys see me, and again, the people that know me on this call know that I pride myself in this, but I get a chance to be Calvin Hadley, really Dr. Calvin. I earned it. Dr. Calvin Hadley in every room that I step into in my entire life, literally every room. I just had a meeting with David Marriott from the Marriott Family Foundation. I got $20 million from them to transform hospitality. When I meet David Marriott, I speak to him with the same inflection in my voice, with the same swag I walk into the room with. When I meet with Sundar Pichai, the head of Google, when I meet with Latasha Gillespie, the head of Amazon, every meeting that I go into, I get a chance to be Dr. Calvin Hadley, and I'm respected as such. I hired somebody at Howard, and they were coming from industry, and that was my main selling point, right? My main selling point was, I know that frequently you have to do what my wife does. My wife is in a Big Four consulting firm, and you don't dive deep into what everybody does. I know what she does, but I didn't know what she did until the pandemic. We would be in the same house during the pandemic, and I would see her, and some of you guys have experienced this. like have a like a reaction before going into these meetings. We would be talking, we'd have a normal conversation, and it was almost like she had to put on a different face and a different voice before she engaged with her colleagues. And I would see kind of the physical manifestations of that stress build up. And I just felt for her and continue to feel for her and continue to feel for so many of us that have to wear the mask every day. That's a tough, tough thing. And I realized that it's really a place of privilege that I don't take for granted, but it's also a place of power to be able to say that literally every space, when I go and talk to the principal of my son's private school, when I go and talk to the police officer in the street, I get a chance to show up as Calvin Hadley, literally in every single room that I'm in. And what I realize is that that radical move toward power is empowering to others. And so I think for us, one, I realize that it's privilege. And so I do want to check and acknowledge my privilege. I think that's important that we also do as we pursue and understand power. But I think that type of unapologetic um, pursuit of power is important, not only for ourselves, not only for our children that we're bringing up, but for those around us, right? To really model what it means to be yourself unapologetically. When I went into that room with Dean Shaw and told her that I was lied to, I didn't have any fear of repercussions. I don't have fear when I'm bringing you the truth, right? Jay-Z knew that the Kendrick Lamar presentation probably wouldn't be as entertaining as Lil Wayne stumbling around with his drunken stupor, because that's what we used to. That's what we want. We want to see some tapping around, right? But Jay-Z didn't care. That's power. Power is the ability to make decisions without fear of the repercussions on the other side. Jay-Z still has that contract. Kendrick Lamar's streams went through the roof. And it was, again, one of the most viewed things in history. But you know what's also power is for us to celebrate President's Day, for us to sit down on my wallet with enslavers in my pocket, right? And so I think for us, we've got to be unapologetic about who we are. We've got to be unapologetic about where we are. And for us as public servants, we've got to be unapologetic about pursuit of understanding how and where to grasp power, how and where to utilize that power, and how and where to open up doors for those that are coming after us. That's our task, right? That's why you come to a Wagner. You don't come to Wagner to be quiet, right? You come to Wagner to kick stuff up. And so for us, as I revel in my ability to be Calvin Hadley in every room, I encourage us. And again, I acknowledge my privilege. That's something my wife helps me understand my male privilege all the time, right? So that's something I'm just coming in contact with, is understanding my privilege. I understand my privilege in that space. I do. I really do. But I think it's extremely important for us to be unapologetic about our pursuit of power, and whatever that looks like for you. I don't know what everybody's job is. I don't know what everybody's position is, but I do know that you chose to be a leader. I do know that you chose to be a public servant. And I do know that at this moment, most of the people in our community are dismayed, right? Most people are turning the TV off. Most people are turning the news off. Most people are disconnecting because you're being bombarded with so much that you don't know where to run. But the leaders must exhibit that equanimity under duress, because without it, we all gonna be lost. And again, when you zoom out, this moment is not as bad as it feels. I always think about this. I'm 38. I'll be 39 this year. Both of my parents were born in the segregated South. My grandmother's grandparents were born enslaved. And so, although this moment feels intense, this moment feels like we've never seen anything like this before, think about the children of the Confederacy, right? When the Confederacy lost that war, they didn't just go and say, I'm taking the L forever. There are a number of people that are invested in preserving the power that was lost, in air quotes, in that space. And so what we feel today has always been the back end of that pendulum swing, right? After enslavement, you had Reconstruction. Well, we don't talk about it. After Reconstruction was the redemption, and the redemption was vicious, right? After the Civil Rights Movement, we had this big pendulum swing with the Civil Rights Movement. After the pendulum swing for the Civil Rights Movement was mass incarceration. We had this big pendulum swing with the Obama family. After the Obama family was Donald Trump and what we're living in now. The pendulum will swing again. But the question is, Where will you access your power? Where will you lead your people? And how will you, regardless of where the pendulum is, regardless of where we are in the pendulum swing, how will you lead your people to the next step? And so I thank you guys for having me. I thank you guys for continuing the power of BSA and continuing to create a space. And I say go out there and kick shit up, right? The reality is that you guys are tomorrow's leaders, whether you decide to or not, whether you understand that or not. Your unapologetic pursuit of power is important. Your unapologetic presence is important. And the reality is that right now, so many of your family members, so many of the people in your community are confused. Equanimity is required. This is not the worst moment that we've been through. And here's the cold part. It's not the worst moment that we will go through. And the pendulum will swing, and you've got to be ready on the other side. So I appreciate you, BSA. I appreciate you, Wagner, and go get that power. I open myself. I don't know if you wanted me to answer questions or if that's a part of it, but I'll be happy to if there's time.